Hello there, welcome to Planet America's Weekend Edition. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Licciardello.
This week, experts fear that Trump's unscientific linking of a common painkiller to autism could do more harm than good. We'll hear from the Autism Science Foundation about what the research really says.
And Jimmy Kimmel is back on air, and while the culture war rages on, we're going to be getting a MAGA perspective about it all. But first...
The former director of the FBI, James Comey, has been indicted by a grand jury on 2 criminal counts following a concerted pressure campaign from President Trump. Comey is accused of 1 count of making a false statement and 1 count of obstruction. This all goes back to a time when Republican senators were digging into the possibility that Comey leaked information about Russian involvement in the 2016 election to try and distract the media from Hillary Clinton's mishandling of classified emails. That's stemming from her time as Secretary of State. The alleged false statement from Comey dates from September 2020, when he appeared before the Senate Judiciary Committee, and he indicated, according to the indictment, that he had not authorised somebody else at the FBI to be the anonymous source in news reports. Count 1 claims he did. Count 2 claims, in doing so, Comey corruptly endeavoured to influence, obstruct or impede that Senate committee. Earlier today, James Comey issued this response.
We've known for years that there are costs to standing up to Donald Trump. We will not live on our knees, but I'm not afraid. My heart is broken for the Department of Justice, but I have great confidence in the federal judicial system, and I'm innocent.
We'll see if that confidence is justified soon enough. The clock was ticking on this. The 5-year statute of limitations was due to expire next week. Last weekend, President Trump urged his Attorney General Pam Bondi to charge Comey, among others, and without naming Comey, Bondi appeared to be referring to the case earlier today when she said on social media, "No one is above the law. Today's indictment reflects this Department of Justice's commitment to holding those who abuse positions of power accountable for misleading the American people. We will follow the facts in this case." The indictment comes just 2 days after President Trump forced the resignation of Virginia prosecutor Eric Siebert, who reportedly found insufficient evidence to bring charges against another Trump antagonist, New York Attorney General Letitia James, over alleged mortgage fraud, and also raised concerns about a potential case against Mr. Comey. Trump then appointed former White House aide and personal Trump lawyer Lindsay Halligan to replace Siebert this week, and lo and behold, she delivered this indictment, which the president has described as justice, and Comey as one of the worst human beings this country has ever been exposed to. Now, Chaz, you'll recall that Trump sacked Jim Comey back in 2017, ostensibly, perhaps ironically, for his alleged mishandling of the Hillary Clinton email affair. But Comey and others said that that was actually because he refused to vow personal loyalty to Trump over the American Constitution.
Yeah, I think it's important to give some context here, John. You mentioned what happened in East Virginia with the US attorney getting sacked because he said he couldn't make a case against, in that case, it was Lisa Cook and Adam Schiff that Trump was trying to get prosecuted. It wasn't just that there wasn't much evidence. There was active public evidence showing that they're both innocent. And Trump still wanted them prosecuted. Now you know it's a cliche about better 10 guilty men go free than 1 innocent man goes to jail. Well, we have a situation here where, at least in East Virginia, there are people being prosecuted where there's public evidence that they're innocent. At the time that happened, the US Attorney in Maryland, where this is happening, behind the scenes was saying, we don't have enough evidence for the James Comey prosecution, which I know you want. And Trump was apparently, this is well off the record, was apparently pressuring her, saying, you're next to get sacked. Yeah. And here we are. So I think people are really anxious to see what this evidence is they've got against James Comey. Because if this is happening everywhere, where we're just prosecuting Trump's enemies, even if there's no evidence at all, and they're just ridiculous cases, they might get thrown out by courts. But in the meantime, that's still punishing his opponents. It's a bad situation.
Yeah, and even if they do find somebody from the FBI to come forward and say, yes, Director James Comey told me to leak this to the media, Comey told Lindsey Graham in that Senate Judiciary Committee hearing, and it was on a glitchy Zoom call because this is the height of the pandemic, Comey said, doesn't ring a bell. He didn't say, no, Senator, absolutely not. So, look, we'll see how this all plays out in court, but it certainly looks like the old wall between the President and the Department of Justice and their decisions has been obliterated.
Yes.
Well, we'll have more on this topic on Monday night's show, so tune in for that. Meanwhile, the other big story this week, late night host Jimmy Kimmel is back on the air. Less than a week into his indefinite suspension by America's ABC network.
Thank you. Anyway, as I was saying before I was interrupted.
You're probably not old enough to remember, but that was a cute callback to television pioneer Jack Paar, who walked off The Tonight Show in 1960 after the network tried to censor one of his jokes.
As I was saying before I was interrupted.
Jack Paar didn't apologise then, and Kimmel didn't apologise this week for the comments that triggered the controversy around him. But he did say this.
You understand that it was never my intention to make light of the murder of a young man. I don't...
And Kimmel did make this point about the role of free speech and being free to criticise and even ridicule the powerful in a free society.
This show is not important. What is important is that we get to live in a country that allows us to have a show like this.
Of course, Kimmel's original suspension by ABC followed these now notorious comments from the head of the Federal Communications Commission, Brendan Carr.
Frankly, when you see stuff like this, I mean, look, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. These companies can find ways to change conduct, to take action, frankly, on Kimmel, or, there's going to be additional work for the FCC ahead.
And some, including Republican Senator Ted Cruz, took that to be kind of a mafia-style threat, given that the FCC has the power to block multi-billion-dollar media mergers that ABC affiliates are currently pursuing.
He says, we can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way.
Yeah.
And I got to say, that's right out of Goodfellas.
Kimmel's comeback saw a massive boost in his broadcast ratings this week, for an average of under 2 million viewers a night to over 6 million, with tens of millions more watching clips online, although President Trump is still not a fan.
I can't believe ABC fake news gave Jimmy Kimmel his job back. The White House was told by ABC that his show was canceled. Something happened between then and now because his audience is gone and his talent was never there.
Well, some of his audience has gone because around 70 ABC affiliate stations owned by the Sinclair Group and Nexstar have so far kept Kimmel off the air. Nexstar saying that it will monitor the show as it returns to ABC. Meanwhile, a shooting at an Immigration and Customs Enforcement or ICE facility in Dallas, Texas this week has left one person dead and 2 critically wounded, all of them immigration detainees.
Law enforcement officials tell CNN that at least 2 detainees were shot. According to the deputy director of ICE, no ICE officers were injured and the shooter is deceased. We are told ICE employees, civilians, and immigrant detainees are among those at that facility.
Once again, the president was quick to point the finger of blame.
This violence is the result of the radical left Democrats constantly demonizing law enforcement, calling for ICE to be demolished and comparing ICE officers to Nazis. The continuing violence from the radical left terrorists in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's assassination must be stopped.
And right on cue, Vice President J.D. Vance was singing from the same song sheet.
If you want to stop political violence, stop telling your supporters that everybody who disagrees with you is a Nazi. If you want to stop political violence, look in the mirror. That's the way that we stop political violence in this country, and we've got to do it.
That advice of looking in the mirror is something that JD could well take on board himself. He, of course, described his now boss Donald Trump as, quote, America's Hitler. But, Chaz, hypocrisy aside, it is still pretty clear this week that attempts to silence free speech following acts of violence are far from over.
Yeah, we should say it's once again too early to know what the shooter's actual political ideology is, if they have any at all. FBI Director Kash Patel did release this photo of an unspent shell casing with the phrase anti-ICE engraved on it from the shooter. Suggests the shooter's of the left. But journalist Ken Klippenstein has been interviewing the shooter's friends, and they say that he had a vaguely libertarian bent. He despised both major parties and politicians generally, but he didn't engage with politics beyond that. They described him as a bit of an online edgelord who withdrew from social life generally, as well as their friendships, several years ago. So maybe he's one of those super online shooters we're seeing so many of these days. Then again, one of his many usernames online was #impeachment. That sounds kind of left to me. So I don't know. We'll find out soon enough, obviously. But sadly, I don't think he's the last political shooter we're going to be seeing anytime soon for a couple of reasons. First of all, we talked about this over the last decade, about 10 years ago, about how these mass shooters, these political shooters, people who are celebrity shooters, when you name them, it attracts copycats.
Yeah.
And these people aren't just being named, they're becoming celebrities. We're clawing through their entire bio, we're exploring all their beliefs and politics. We're making them huge. So that's going to inspire copycats in all likelihood. Yeah. On top of that, when you have people like J.D. Vance talking all about the super violent left, research suggests that even though Americans generally are very anti-political violence, the way to make them pro-political violence is to tell them that the other side is very violent. And then you don't want to be unarmed. You don't want to be unprotected. You don't want to be carrying the knife to the gunfight. And so then your side becomes more pro-violence. And this is a great way to get a cycle of escalation happening. And I wouldn't be at all surprised when you add that with the copycat effect, we might be seeing more of these shootings really soon. Yeah,
and you're right, there is evidence to suggest there was a copycat effect, that the alleged perpetrator, in this case a 29-year-old man, had been watching videos of Charlie Kirk's assassination. There is experts in the field talk about the associations between previous mass and public shooting events. Port Arthur coming as it did just after the Dunblane school shooting in Scotland. The shooter in the Port Arthur case was aware of what had happened in Dunblane and asked about it after he committed his crime. So we know there is an association. It's a little bit more difficult. It's one thing to say we're not going to name somebody who shoots up a school or shoots up a cinema where they're not targeting individuals. When it is a political motivation and they are targeting either symbolic government targets like ICE or political individuals, you can't escape the political element. It doesn't mean you elevate their cause, it doesn't mean you have to identify them, you're absolutely right. But do we ignore the fact that there is a political motivation? We're ignoring plenty of other things. The fact that these are, one thing in common is these are young men, spend a lot of time online playing shoot-'em-up video games, then getting easy access to guns and being a crack shot when they get it because they've been training for thousands of hours in their basement. So there are lots of things we don't talk about in this blame game of left versus right.
That is true. We should also say, by the way, that as far as the government silencing free speech goes, this administration did not invent it. Only this week, we saw Google send a letter to the House Judiciary Committee claiming that senior Biden White House officials conducted repeated and sustained outreach to them, pressing them to censor user-generated content related to the COVID-19 pandemic. Then, importantly, did not violate Google's policies at all at the time. Google stated that they felt it is unacceptable and wrong when any government attempts to dictate how Google moderates content. And look, I agree. You may have more sympathy for this kind of censorship because of the COVID context. I haven't forgotten the COVID context, I understand. But the Constitution is the Constitution. Free speech is free speech. It doesn't have exceptions. And if it doesn't break the laws or Google's rules, then I'm not sure the government should be getting involved. What do you think?
Well, it's a fascinating ethical discussion that we haven't got time for
not,
here today. I'd just say that COVID was such an exceptional case where lives were put at risk by misinformation. And so while you don't silence the individuals who might be expressing their belief in that misinformation about COVID, do you allow an algorithm to spread that far and wide to millions of other people who will be influenced by it and maybe die as a result? The only exceptions, as we've discussed many times, to free speech is when it is going to cause imminent threat of violence or danger to individuals, the don't shout fire in a crowded theatre test. So you could well argue that that was the case during COVID. Maybe it was a different case, but that is one that will be debated for a long time.
That's okay. Let's leave it there. I understand the time. Finally, on the free speech beat, Pete Hegseth is saying, hold my beer. Quite literally saying hold my beer. The Department of War has just released new guidelines for journalists saying that all of them must sign agreements restricting their movement in the Pentagon and stipulating that they will not obtain or possess unauthorised material. Now, that might sound reasonable in a high security environment, But another way of putting that is to say the Department of War will forbid reporters from gathering any information that has not been approved for release and will revoke press credentials from any journalists who do not obey. And that sounds a lot worse. So bad, in fact, that even Trump isn't supporting these guidelines.
Pentagon be in charge of deciding what reporters can report on?
Yeah, I don't think so.
Are you okay with them limiting that?
Nothing stops reporters, you know.
Have you been recently filming?
Under the bus, John!
Yeah, Pete can have his beer back. For more on this current crackdown on free speech in the United States, we spoke this week to conservative author and journalist Jonathan Rauch.
I've been writing for over 30 years about the dangers of left-wing censorship in places like universities and increasingly corporations and newsrooms. And conservatives rightly called this out. They said this is wrong. They said we should live in a society with robust discourse. And that's what conservatives said in the Trump camp until they got power. And then they had a choice to make. And the choice was stick with that principle and allow a full flourishing of viewpoints, or say, once we have power, well, by God, we're going to use it. They made the latter choice, and they've done it in a bunch of spheres. It's in media, where they're using lawsuits, they're using direct threats. It's in universities, which they're threatening to essentially shut down or cripple if they don't knuckle under to intrusions on academic freedom. It's in all kinds of places.
Of course, this isn't just about trying to silence comedy and criticism and mockery. It's also about silencing science and diversity and the law as well. What are you seeing in all that?
We're seeing alarm, deep concern. We're not at the point yet where ordinary Americans worry about what they say. I think we are at a point where people in media companies that might be targets of the administration are very much worried about it. They can be sued. A number of news organizations have felt they needed to settle frivolous lawsuits with President Trump. The New York Times was sued by Trump for $15 billion. So they are cognizant of this. And it is the case that people in America are worried about watching what they say about the administration in a way that we have never before seen in my lifetime. And that kind of chilling, when it begins to take place, is the beginning of the loss of freedom in a country.
And John Rauch, following the death of Charlie Kirk, are you seeing the right now trying to claim greater moral authority in their attempts to police free speech?
Yeah, I think that's right. Of course, the assassination of Mr. Kirk is a moral outrage. It's indefensible. Of course, everyone, conservative and non-conservative, is right to be angry, upset about it. That said, it looks like the administration, beginning with President Trump and all the way down, have seized on this as an opportunity to further their crackdown on speech. I'll read you a quotation the other day from Stephen Miller, who is considered the most influential aide in the administration. Here's what he says. With God as my witness, we are going to use every resource we have at the Department of Justice, Homeland Security, and throughout this government to identify, disrupt, dismantle, and destroy these networks and make America safe for the American people. It will happen, and we will do it in Charlie's name.
Now, you say the chilling effect that we're currently seeing is unprecedented in modern times. Why is that? Why has the second Trump administration so successfully chilled speech in a way that even the first Trump administration didn't? Where has all the resistance gone?
Not so much where has the resistance gone, it's that the second Trump administration is a good deal more organized and more ruthless than the first. They are willing to use tools that the first Trump administration was not willing to use because it had appointees in place who were generally speaking conscious of the limits of the law. Second term, Mr. Trump, as we knew he would, this is no surprise, has made personal loyalty to him the primary qualification for appointments and appointed people like Brendan Carr, who is the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, And this administration has a compliant Congress. Congress could step in and put a stop to a lot of this, but it won't. The courts are very slow moving. And that puts the administration in a position to run what amounts to a shock and awe campaign of using every tool at its disposal, for example, regulatory tools and lawsuits. It's going through the military. It's actually fired members of the military who it deemed to have unacceptable views about Charlie Kirk, through the universities and so on, in a rapid attempt to transform the culture as quickly as it can while it still has unified control of the government. It didn't try that in the first term, both because it didn't always have unified control and because it didn't have the personnel or organization, but now it does.
And John, we have seen something of a reaction, a backlash, a correction to the perceived wokeness and policing of free speech coming from the left. Now we're seeing it apparently coming from the right. Is it inevitable that pendulum will swing back again, or could this somehow be a more enduring shift?
You know, the only way to answer that question will be in hindsight. We're in an odd condition in the United States that I liken to the famous physics thought experiment of Schrodinger's cat. This is a quantum mechanics thing. You've got a cat in a box, and because of quantum mechanics, it's in a superposed state of both being alive and being dead until you open the box later, and then it adopts one of those conditions. We are about halfway to Hungary in terms of the efforts that are being by this administration to consolidate power, to sideline Congress, to use almost a monarchical form of government, to intimidate civil society. What we don't know yet is, will it work? Will it take? Will we see a coalescence of resistance in civil society? Will the courts be able to hold out? They have so far. Will Congress switch control to the Democrats? And if so, will they be able to rally public support for keeping us a democratic country? Will the Republicans, if there's a free and fair election in 2028, which I'm not at all sure of, but if there is, and if the Republicans lose, will they voluntarily agree to the turnover of power? They didn't last time. But depending how that series of things goes, we're on very different tracks. And I think right now what people need to understand is that we're at a point of danger in the United States, but the course isn't yet determined.
Jonathan, how does America rid itself of the woke right and the woke left and return to the classical liberalism that America was famous for until the last 2 decades or so? Is it gone for good, or is there a theory how to get it back?
It's embattled. Liberalism in the European sense, of course, not the American sense of sort of left-leaning progressivism. Liberalism in the classic sense, limited government, constitutional government, and so forth, is under threat all over the world. Maybe not Australia, but we've seen 4 governments in France in the past 4 years. The AfD in Germany, a far right-wing party, is within shooting distance of power. If there were an election in Britain today, it would be run by the far right. All over the world, we're seeing a crisis. And how this comes out, I think, depends to a large extent on whether the center left and the center right can overcome their sectarian differences about policy and rally to the defense of the system that they all care about. And that's really another way of asking the question that I tried to answer the last time, which is so much in the United States depends on whether those forces can combine, consolidate, and push back. I'm not pessimistic yet. I'm hopeful. But we have seen the far right get much further in this country than I ever would have expected.
The Trump administration has issued a warning against a commonly used pain and fever relieving drug, acetaminophen, commonly referred to in this country as paracetamol, because they claim it could cause autism.
President Trump today tried reversing decades of medical advice given to pregnant women.
Don't take Tylenol. There's no downside. Don't take it.
Specifically, the Food and Drug Administration is set to tell physicians that using acetaminophen, an active ingredient in Tylenol, during pregnancy can be associated with increased risk of autism.
Not so much, no. Despite the lack of science behind that claim of a link, The president made it repeatedly, although he probably should have practiced saying acetaminophen a little bit more.
The FDA will be notifying physicians that the use of well, let's see how we say that. Acetaminophen. Is that okay?
And he wisely pretty much stuck to calling it Tylenol after that.
Smart. If only that was as big as the issue. RFK Jr. was being actually very restrained and very careful with what he was saying. Yeah. Marty Makary, FDA chief, similarly, very restrained. What they were trying to do is not cause a panic. And they were trying to not stop pregnant women from just throwing out the Tylenol, because Tylenol is actually important for them to take at times because there is no alternative. If you have a fever, if you're a pregnant woman, you can't have ibuprofen. That causes miscarriages. That's much worse. So what's the other option? Your other option is just to have a fever. Now, if you have a high fever, then that's both worse in terms of miscarriages, but also it's worse in terms of potentially autism.
Yeah, there's a much greater link between fevers and autism than there is Tylenol and autism, that's for sure.
Exactly. So what they were trying to communicate, and this is what all the scientists are saying, is you should be careful with Tylenol when you're pregnant, but if you need it, take it. Only take what you need, but if you need it, take it. And Trump was just trampling all over that message.
Yeah.
They're telling, no, don't take it, don't take it.
It was eerily reminiscent of those bad old days of 2020 when he was up there giving those daily COVID briefings and started ranting about ivermectin and bleach and maybe if we shine light inside it, and the medical professionals were just there going, oh, God, no, I don't want to be here. But this time, the role of Anthony Fauci was being played by RFK Jr.
I know, it was amazing. And so he did just monopolise all the attention. He took over the entire press conference, and then he used that attention to direct people's focus on just some random rumours he'd heard.
I will say there are parts of the world that don't take Tylenol. I mean, there's a rumor, and I don't know if it's so or not, that Cuba, they don't have Tylenol because they don't have the money for Tylenol, and they have virtually no autism, okay? Tell me about that one.
Yeah, I'll tell you about that one. According to the Autism and Developmental Disabilities Monitoring Network, Cuba actually had a higher rate of autism in 2023 than America did. And then Trump started to rant about vaccines for some reason.
You have a little child, little fragile child, and you get a vat of 80 different vaccines, I guess, 80 different blends, and they pump it in. So ideally, a woman won't take Tylenol. And on the vaccines, it would be good instead of one visit where they pump the baby, load it up with stuff, you'll do it over a period of 4 times or 5 times.
Who would have thought it wouldn't have been RFK Jr. talking about vaccines? Someone else. What he's referring to there is the MMR vaccine. And those comments that he just made have made doctors very concerned. Even RFK's hand-picked vaccine panel supported those MMR shots as a combined shot just last week. RFK's panel. And they also voted to keep the hepatitis B vaccine to be administered to newborn babies as well. But Trump disagrees.
Hepatitis B is sexually transmitted. There's no reason to give a baby that's almost just born hepatitis B. So I would say wait till the baby is 12 years old and formed and take hepatitis B.
So not only was Trump scaring people unnecessarily about Tylenol in a way that his health officials were trying to not do, but he was also scaring them about the MMR vaccine and, just for bonus, the hepatitis B vaccine as well. It was not a good performance, John.
No, just another example, unfortunately, when it comes to medicine and indeed many other subject matter areas, Trump is recklessly, willfully ignorant of the facts. He forms a view, often based on anecdote or life experience. A lot of his views on autism reportedly come from the early 2000s when his younger son Barron was born. That was in the aftermath of the now discredited, fraudulent, retracted Wakefield study that drew a link between vaccines and autism. That had yet to be retracted at that point. Trump was involved with several fundraising efforts, had people around to Mar-a-Lago to raise money for autism research, and they were the ones when he says, people always tell me about how their child was ruined by vaccines. That's where it got into his head, apparently. Almost 20 years ago, he and Melania reportedly did not have Barron vaccinated all at once. They spread out the vaccines over an extended period because he was so worried about his newborn child. So you can see why he had this sort of visceral emotional reaction and fear, as so many parents do. But he's got the best advice in the world available to him, and he does not listen to them. And he even goes further than the experts who are standing behind him, giving just rubbish advice. and dangerous advice as well, as we know. But for more on this, I did speak to an expert, the Chief Science Officer at America's Autism Science Foundation, Dr. Alycia Halladay. Dr. Halladay, welcome to Planet America. I wonder, how solid is the presumed link between acetaminophen and autism? Is it based on good science?
The earliest studies pretty much asked parents who have a child with autism whether they took acetaminophen during their pregnancy and whether or not they gave acetaminophen to their child during the first few years of life. And from that, there were a number of other studies that were conducted. And while an early investigation or some of those early small studies showed a small link, once the studies got bigger and it took into account things like background genetics and maternal health history, and other things that could possibly bias the results, the relationship disappeared. So the last few studies that were conducted, which were very large and used a lot of people from different countries, they did not find an association between taking acetaminophen during pregnancy and having a child with autism. So there were a few small studies at the very beginning using things like just asking casually, but those didn't really pan out in larger, kind of more rigorous analyses.
So you seem to be saying, Doctor, this is basically just about prevalency, and they could just as well have been asking about, have you fed your baby mashed banana, and they end up being on the autism spectrum.
Absolutely. And when you look at relationships, you're not looking at causation, right? So you could say the organic food consumption increased and autism increased. Or you can say, all these parents gave their children steamed carrots or mashed carrots. It doesn't mean one thing causes the other. In fact, there may have been things that were accounted for in later studies like background genetics, or the reason the mother was taking acetaminophen to begin with during pregnancy, which seems to make a huge difference, and for how long.
So, Doctor, how do you answer the question that you must get? If it's not something like Tylenol, then what is causing autism?
Well, first, I would tell pregnant women who probably are at a very vulnerable time, especially right now in history, that they should continue to trust their medical provider, right? So if they're having pain, go to your medical provider. If you have a fever, go to your medical provider. They will provide the best advice that they can for you based on your particular situation. These large studies don't know you and why you need to take Tylenol or acetaminophen, so trust your doctor. We also know from decades and decades of science that genetic influences play a huge role in autism causes. So whether people study family members or twins, whether they're able to look at the genetics themselves by doing things like sequencing or looking at different gene mutations, you obviously see a huge genetic influence. But just like everything, the environment has a role in that, right? And the environment should be considered very broadly, everything from the neighborhood you grew up in to the medications you take or the medications you took while you were pregnant, what the father was exposed to. There's all sorts of different environmental factors that I think people tend to put them into these buckets of it has to be a toxin or it has to be a medication, when environmental factors are so broad. And science obviously needs to do a better job at looking at the gene environment interactions and the way the environment influences genetic influences. And in fact, that's actually one of the major announcements on Monday that just kind of got buried was that the NIH in the United States is investing $50 million to look at, among other things, environmental factors and the way they interact with genetics and autism.
And what impact do you think the president's words about Tylenol are going to have? We certainly saw his words back during COVID have a significant impact on people's behaviour.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, and he literally just said during the press conference, don't do it, tough it out. And I think especially women got really angry at that because there was some sort of implied suggestion that pregnant women aren't tough enough or that they need to suffer more. So at least the United States, I have seen a fair amount of blowback to the president about that. On the other hand, I think that there's a big problem, at least the United States, with a mistrust in industry. So this administration has felt like science has been bought off by big pharma, as they call it. And so there has been a bigger mistrust of industry and pharmaceutical companies, their motives, and why they're doing this sort of what they're doing when they sell products to people. I think that's very misdirected. I wish I had a solution on how to resolve that, but it's becoming a bigger problem.
So if you could sit the President of the United States down and try and explain to him what he does not know about autism, what would you say to him?
I would try and make him and even Secretary Kennedy, I would enforce that autism is really a complex disorder, right? So he may be thinking about autism as a single unitary concept, but what we know from the community over 20, 30 years is that there's vast differences in people across the spectrum. Someone can be intellectually impaired, or someone can be working in a competitive job. Someone can be living independently, or they may require 24/7 report, or anything in the middle. So I think that there's this somewhat misunderstanding that autism is just one thing, the profound autism, when it's really a diverse set of symptoms and traits. And therefore, there cannot be one cause, right? So there is not one cause. There is not one thing that relates to autism. It's many different things, including many different environmental factors and many genes. So I would really try and emphasize that. And honestly, we're at the Autism Science Foundation, we're making an effort to get him to see that. I mean, the Secretary of Health and Human Services says that there is an increase in the number of people with autism because he himself has never seen an autistic adult. There are autistic adults out there. They exist. And we are hoping that he takes the opportunity to meet some.
As well as being an expert in this field, you've talked about the fact that you're also the parent of a child on the autism spectrum as well. Have you been through that same process that so many parents have been through of thinking, was it me? Was it something I did or didn't do or took or didn't take that has caused this?
Absolutely. And, I don't think that any parent is immune to this, right? Anytime their child suffers or has any sort of challenge whatsoever, parents think, what can I do differently and what could I have done? Frankly, I got pregnant through in vitro fertilization, and for a while I thought, oh, it must have been the IVF. Well, science since showed that children born of IVF are no more likely to have neurodevelopmental disorders than those conceived by the traditional method. So of course I blame myself and, thought, well, was there something I could have done differently? I also kind of re-examined everything I ate and drank, every iced tea I drank during the summer. But I think it's really important that we stop doing that. That comes from an antiquated belief that there was something or a theory from the 1960s by someone named Bruno Bettelheim, who actually suggested that refrigerator mothers or mothers that did not cuddle or love their children enough were the reason their child had an autism diagnosis. And that unfortunately has carried through even to 2025, where we continue to blame mothers and we continue to put the blame on the mothers. And so of course they're going to blame themselves. But it's something that I think we should all work hard to change. I know there has been some progress, but frankly, not enough.
The culture war is continuing to rage, and it's becoming increasingly clear that both sides do not understand each other at all. So maybe it's a good time to check in with the MAGA side and see what they have to say. I'm not trying to make points here or enforce fact checks. I just want to hear their opinions. And I spoke to Nick Sortor, a journalist, podcaster, and strong MAGA supporter, to seek his opinion on politics in 2025. Nick Sortor, welcome to Planet America. Now, let's take a step back from the current news cycle. What do you personally like best about the MAGA movement that's different from the political movements from the past?
Well, the MAGA movement is interesting because it's a mixture between, it's not necessarily fully aligned with the Republican Party, certainly not aligned with the Democrat Party, but we've gotten a lot of people since 2015. President Trump kicked off this movement, obviously. It's a very populist movement where it's very diverse, people from all walks of life, all backgrounds, all socioeconomic statuses. You even have a lot of blue dog Democrats is what they're called, traditional Democrats, the working folks that have come over to MAGA. And President Trump brought us all together. And, we have leaders such as people like Charlie Kirk and such that have done a fantastic job at really making this movement what it is. And it's only gotten bigger and more powerful over the past 10 years. And if last week's events show you anything at all, I think it's just going to continue on an upward trajectory here. And the politics as usual in the United States isn't coming back anytime soon. People are fed up with both parties, both the Republican Party and the Democrat Party. And so a lot of people end up flowing into MAGA for that reason.
And what have been your favourite actions of the second Trump administration so far?
There have been a lot for sure, but I think one of the most important moves that we've made so far is going out and rounding up the millions upon millions of illegals that were brought into the country under the Biden regime. We had no idea who these people are, and we're getting millions upon millions of them out. I believe 1 million so far have self-deported. They're given $1,000 and the chance to return legally. I think that is going to be one of the legacies that President Trump has for this administration. That's really going to change the fabric of our country. We're not against immigration in general. We're against the illegal kind. You can come in, but you got to come in legally. And how effective that's been, you see it because people are, especially on the left, are fussing about that the most, calling them slave patrols, the ICE agents, calling them slave patrols and the Gestapo. And now you have radicalized Democrats going out and trying to assassinate ICE agents in the street. I don't know if you saw this story from yesterday down there in Dallas, but clearly that has been one of the most effective policies of the administration so far. And in reality, it's just getting started.
What would you say the things that Trump has done this year that you haven't been such a fan of, if anything?
No administration is going to be perfect. I'm certainly not excited about the way that the Epstein situation has been handled from day one. I think the ball has been dropped on that time and time again. And that's something that's bothered a lot of people for a long time. I don't know why. I don't have the inner workings as to why that has gone so badly. There was a lot of over-promising and under-delivering there. And I would say, there's a good chunk of MAGA that would agree with me on that. Some people would attack me for saying that, but I'm just being totally honest with you. That's definitely one of the low points so far.
Do you worry at all about Democrats getting into power in 4 or 8 years' time and employing some of those tools that Trump has employed against them, like, say, using emergency laws liberally?
Yeah, I think we've already seen them do that, though. Look, the amount of political enemies that look at what they did to Donald Trump on a federal level and on a state level in places like New York. Democrats don't hold back when they have power. They don't think about things like, oh, well, what's going to happen when the Republicans are back in power? They knock, because they know that we don't use these tools. We don't push the envelope. We just fall in line and say, well, it's like this, that's against precedent. We've done that for so many years now, saying those things, and the American people are fed up with it because every time the Democrats are in power, we get totally shafted by them. And then when we get power, we, just tiptoe around. And we're tired of it at this point. We're using the same, and actually to a lesser extent, using some of these tools to, further our own agenda, except for you're not seeing political prosecutions. There might be people calling to be using the DOJ to just arrest everybody that we disagree with, but it's not happening. You haven't seen Joe Biden be indicted. You haven't really seen any political enemy of President Trump be indicted at this point, no matter how many people are calling for it. So I disagree with that entire premise that, well, what's going to happen when the Democrats get in power? The Democrats are going to do what they're going to do regardless of what we do now. So I don't worry about that at all.
Finally, Nick, for those viewers who might be from the other side of politics, who might be afraid of Trump and the MAGA movement, what do you think they're getting wrong or just don't get about the MAGA movement?
I don't understand what there would be to be afraid of. We're not doing the whole violence thing over here. I know people think speech is violence, or like Charlie Kirk, for example, would talk to anybody. One of his MOs was, okay, I want to bring people in and I'm just going to have civil debates with them. I just want to talk to them. And, they come off, a lot of these people were coming into these debates with Charlie like super hostile, but by the end of it, he was able to like diffuse that hostility and turn it into, an informative conversation. And for whatever reason, because a lot of these people have been convinced that MAGA and, I guess Republicans are evil Hitlerian devils, that they feel like they're not able to have a conversation with us. And I know one of the Democrat talking points has been, well, even if you're a legal immigrant, you should be afraid. I live in Washington, D.C., which is under federal control right now to a much greater extent than usual. And the media there, and which skews very left, and Democrat politicians have convinced anybody there that's not white for the most part, that they should be scared of ICE in the streets and National Guard in the streets. These fear-mongering tactics, that's what's actually making people afraid. There is no, I love walking the streets of DC now. There is no problem. They're not bothering legal residents. They're not doing anything like that. There's nothing to be afraid of. I mean, you should be excited that the streets are safe again, that you can walk around and not get mugged or shot or kidnapped or worse. I mean, it's the fear comes from the fear-mongering rhetoric. That's it. There is no other reason to be afraid. We're not inherently violent people.
Nick Sortor, thanks for visiting Planet America.
Appreciate you guys.
A correction before we go. On Monday night's program, we talked about Vice President J.D. Vance calling for people to be sacked for celebrating the death of Charlie Kirk.
So when you see someone celebrating Charlie's murder, call them out. And hell, call their employer.
I then played you a number of clips taken from YouTube of what I described as people claiming to have been sacked over Charlie Kirk, and apparently being extremely upset about it.
Well, I would have never done that.
We then talked about people who claim to have been sacked as a part of this online campaign, further fueled by Vance's comments from academia, journalism, sports. But while all of that happened, those clips we showed you purporting to be of people claiming to be sacked over Charlie Kirk were dodgy. Despite it being captioned on YouTube and some of the clips themselves as people who had been sacked for criticising Kirk, in fact, they'd been sacked for entirely different reasons, and in some cases, they were basically hoaxes, internet trolls sending people up who have been sacked. I played those clips not knowing that they were being misrepresented or were basically attention seekers. Some people in those clips are understandably concerned they could be targeted for criticising Kirk when they did not. The bottom line is this: the story is real. The concerns over people being sacked for what is still legal free speech are real, but it turns out the illustration we gave was not, and we should have double checked. So to those in the clips, if we contributed to your feeling of distress or anxiety at this time, please accept our apology. And thank you to the Planet America viewer who pointed it out to us. There is a statement on the ABC Corrections and Clarifications page. And that is all for another weekend edition of Planet America. We'll be back on Monday night on ABC TV at 9:35 p.m. Don't miss that.
We're going to have another weekend edition at the same time next Friday. And do not forget the Prep Podcast. It's available in all the usual pod places. See you.
Bye-bye.